set the recording going because I always forget to do that. And I am really excited about tonight. It's no secret that there's a lot of uncertainty in everything this year. So it's important to have things that we can count on. And one of the things I've learned to count on is Archer Mayer. I can count on a new Joe Gunther minstrel. I can count on Archer doing an event at Northshire in October. And I can count on that event not only being full of tales of death investigation and rogues met in the line of duty, but also to be excellent. When Archer's partner in crime, Margot, suggested that Dr. Greg Davis, a forensic pathologist and Joe Gunther superfan, to interview Archer, I clapped my hands and knew it was going to be a great event. Certified by the American Board of Pathology and Anatomic Pathology, Clinical Pathology, and Forensic Pathology, Dr. Greg Davis is a forensic pathologist at University of Kentucky Healthcare and professor of pathology and laboratory medicine. He was Associate Chief Medical Examiner of the Commonwealth of Kentucky and now serves as pro bono consultant to the Office of the Kentucky State Medical Examiner. Dr. Davis has testified as an expert in forensic medicine, pathology, and toxicology in 18 states, the U.S. Federal Court, and the Republic of Singapore. And you can catch his weekly radio spot, Dr. Greg Davis on Medicine, on Kentucky Public Radio Station, WUKY. Archer's new book, the 31st Joe Gunther novel, is called The Orphan's Guilt. The press has already called it impressive and heartrending. If you've not already ordered it, you can find the link to do so in the chat box. Please welcome to Northshire Live, Dr. Greg Davis and Archer Mayer.
Thank you very much. You know, I discovered Archer's writing a long time ago when he and I actually met at Colby College in Waterville, Maine during the annual New England Seminar in Forensic Sciences. And Archer gave a talk there. I immediately went out and grabbed several of his novels. I still remember the first one of his I read, The Skeleton's Knee. I don't think that's the first Joe Gunther novel. Yeah, number 4. And I remember my jaw dropping because in my world, we take everything with a grain of salt, obviously. And oftentimes, mystery writers don't get it, or they use artistic license to such a degree that I would never do anything violent to a book, but figuratively, we want to throw the book across the room. What I immediately understood about Archer was here's somebody who did his research, who wove it into a compelling narrative, not in a preachy or didactic way, but taught the reader and also exposed her to the real world of police work, of forensic work. So I just wanted to preface that with saying that he is highly respected in my world of forensic medicine and pathology and death investigation as one of the few who, quote, gets it and who, quote, gets it right. I usually go to bed around 8:30 or 9 most nights because I got to get up early. So I'm always judicious when I start a Joe Gunther novel because I know I'm probably going to be alternating between a wee dram of scotch and a cup of coffee as I stay up into the wee hours reading. So I guess starting out, Archer, a question, and I know you probably get this ad infinitum, but one of the things that I've always been interested in is how, after all these years, each and every Joe Gunther story stands alone and yet is part of an arc. And there must be, I don't know, what's the inspiration and perspiration to be able to do something like that?
Well, before I answer, Greg, a delight to see you. The reference you made to our first meeting probably goes back almost 30 years, damn near, because you and I, as proud fathers, were consorting on how to marry our children together so that we could be official relatives, instead of the kind of relatives that you wished you could have chosen when you were born into a family.
We had a plan.
We had a plan. We had a plan. They, of course, being good children, totally ignored that plan. What the hell? They still, in fairness to them, they still laugh about it 30 years later. So it goes without saying to those who know me that I have about 3 friends on the face of the earth, and you're on top of the heap, and that means a great deal to me. And thank you for being here tonight and for aiding and abetting in my nefarious career. Now, in answer to your question, I think that the one word that immediately leapt to mind was responsibility. It's the responsibility I feel I owe to the characters, to the readers, and to my own soul, if you will. I never began writing for the money. That turns out to have been really smart. I've never been disappointed in that grand plan. The fates have dealed out to me exactly as I had anticipated. So therefore, why do you do this? And the answer has turned out, as with so many things in life, less on what you planned and more on how things turned out, which gives you that 20/20 hindsight that allows you to look back and go, well, I don't feel like I've wasted my life, so therefore, how did I make it work? It's called reverse engineering of a deeply personal nature. And what I discovered after the fact that after a few lumps in my early life, which I never shared with anybody, I had internalized a reconstruction of self in order to function as a 3-dimensional human being. This is a long-winded way to say that I had suffered from some sort of childhood PTSD long before those initializations had ever hit the books or popularity or anything else. And so what do? Well, for one, you go into your inner self, you go into your imagination as a curative. How do you rebuild a life? Pretty much in isolation. And I decided, and this is all, like I said, thinking back. At the time, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I clearly fell back on my inner resources and spoke to my imagination and my creativity to conjure up a curative, or at least a meditative program, which was to create hardworking, decent, deeply morally guided human beings. Some of them may be straight arrows like Joe Gunther, who's the lead in the books. Some of them may be quite complex, such as Willie Kunkel.
Really?
Yeah. And my own daughter has said, oh, well, you're so Willie Kunkel, it's not even funny. It takes one to know one. Anyhow, whoever you want to hang my shingle on, I commingled these people, constructed of people who represented me closely, people who represented what I wished to be closely, and all the others that I had encountered in a very peripatetic life. I mean, I moved around. I lived in 30 different places before I settled down in Vermont, actually 40 years ago. So I went from racing it nonstop, learning languages, learning cultures, not keeping friends, moving, to coming to a dead stop. And I'm in the same house for 38 years. I wondered myself, why am I writing Joe Gunther? Why am I writing this? I've now come to humorously regard it as an interminable series of books. Because most people, even Sue Grafton, she was supposed to do 24 books or however many letters are on the alphabet. I think I miscounted. And then you're supposed to move on. Unfortunately, she died, which was not in the plan, but everybody looks at it that way, but not me. I thought that might be the case, but then I realized this is therapeutic. But not just to me, that's a selfish act. This, because of the feedback I was getting from my readers, this was working for all of us. My examinations were of use to others. And if I kept myself focused and sharp and aware of ongoing human problems and permutations, then I would keep the series sharp and focused, even though I'm stuck with my writer's voice. I'm stuck with Vermont, which life could be worse. I'm stuck with the characters. I'm stuck with the police procedural concept. But are we all not stuck with our lives? I mean, we are who we are, right? I mean, that's the way it is. And we sometimes change that around, but other times, most often, we adapt and we make it work, and we make the best out of a deal that may not be terrific, but it may be okay. And here I was, a self-employed writer whose early reviews were magnificent enough to make ends meet. And I was astonished to discover that, oh my God, from the very first novel, I used to write history books before, so I differentiate. From the very first novel, I was employable. Now my overhead was tiny and my needs were tiny, so $10,000 a year, that was employable. That was good enough. And therefore I wasn't greedy. And there were even times when people said, "Oh, well, you know, my agent, oh, we could you know, up your demands." And I went, no, I want to stay employed. Don't get greedy for next year's book and then get unemployed for the book after that. Let's think long haul. And that's where I changed gears ever so slightly and began to see this series of books as a single book. And the individual entries are chapters, if you will, or whatever other image you wish to employ. And so, but to your point, Greg, don't write the books as if they were Hardy Boy entries. Okay, you can't make a reference in book 5 to the mystery of the spiral staircase and expect people to know what the hell you're talking about. So the responsibility is twofold. One is to bring in new readers so that they don't feel, well, gosh, I'm just walking midway into a party where half the people are already drunk. You know, I want to catch up and I can't do it because all these previous books are out of print, let's say. Fortunately, they're not. But you can see the conundrum, the complexity of addressing the faithful who have been with me from the beginning and the newcomers who have just dropped in for a cup of tea and I hope will stick forever. It turned out that that was less of a challenge than I imagined because of that responsibility that I referenced at the top of the hour, which was I owe it to myself, I owe it to the readers, and I owe it to the characters to treat every entry like its own novel. So old timers will be reinforced by a little additional insight, but newcomers will absolutely not be flummoxed by who the hell these people are. I guess the way that you share that apparent dichotomy is that you make the intimate connection between reader and character immediate. So from chapter 1, you feel like you're in the company of friends. The proximity between the reader's experiences and those suffered by the characters will be parallel and close enough that the readers will go, oh, okay, well, I sort of feel at home. And of course, we're writing about Vermont, which is familiar to a lot of people, even in concept, if not in reality. And they know that I'm writing about real towns, Brattleboro and you know, Putney or whatever.
Bellows Falls.
Bellows Falls, right? Yes. God forbid. I remember when the cover of Bellows Falls, the guys in New York said, "Well, what are you going to title it?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I haven't gotten there yet." And they said, well, what's it about?" And I said, "Well, it mostly takes place in a town here called Bellows Falls." I said, "Oh God, we're going to name it that. You know, that's what a perfect title." And I went, Oh, Jesus. Yeah. You have no idea what the impact of that's going to be locally. But as it turns out, all was well, and I was being a little gun shy.
Well, I hark back to something you just said about honoring the reader and respecting the reader. And, I don't know where it is in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but we all need to be acknowledged and seen by others as humans. And that's also something that has struck me about your novels is we're not talking about cartoon characters. And even if Joe is a straight shooter, he's still a human being. And you've got Willie, who, God forgive me, is probably my favorite character in any novel ever. And I've been able to see him grow and do things I never thought he would be capable of.
Yeah.
But I think about when I was at Wake Forest University for a few years on faculty, not in the English department, but that was Dr. Maya Angelou, and she said, people may not remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And I don't think I can quote Joe Gunther novels chapter and verse, but I sure know how they make me feel intellectually and emotionally. And I feel sad when I finish one because I'm already ready for the next.
Oh, lovely, lovely, lovely. Well, that was the grand plan. What can I say? Where I wasn't thinking grandly and I had no plan, but instinctively, and I guess that's what saved my bacon through book by book by book, is that I fly on instinct. I've never looked at this in a mechanistic way. I write what I'm curious about. I write what I hope that the reader will enjoy sharing with me because it's new coming news to me. I am a nosy, curious guy. The funny thing was, someone asked me the other day, well, when you went to college, what did you major in? And I went, well, a guy like me who'd fully expect that I'd go in English and be an English major because I'm a writer, duh. Well, I took, I don't know, 3 weeks of English. And I went, oh boy, I'm so out of here. This isn't interesting. I love to read. I'm a promiscuous reader, but I don't want to be an English major. And instead, I went to history, US history. Well, of course, I explained that to myself by saying, well, I've been brought up overseas. I've been brought up on the road. I know very little about the culture and the country where I now live. And I need to educate myself. But in fact, I've come to understand that the reason I became a historian is because I'm probably the nosiest guy you're going to meet. I'm an investigator. I dig into stuff. I want to find out why. And so I've been doing that with the United States ever since. And when people say, well, what mystery books do you read, Mr. Mayor? I always say, I don't read those cheesy things, which is impossibly disrespectful. I read history books because I still want to find out why in God's name do we do what we do. And in fact, that's of course the punchline to the Joe Gunther books is that they aren't whodunits. I could care less who did it. And a couple of times I've gotten that wrong and I had to rewrite the books to rewrite the bad guy. But all of them are why done-its. They are explanations, or at least they are hooks thrown into the water that constitute humanity with a hope of getting some sort of explanation as to what triggers us to in our actions, because we are a weird bunch of people.
I had a formative experience early in my career as a death investigator and a forensic pathologist that makes me think of exactly that. I was performing an examination on a homicide victim, and the lead detective who was there in the autopsy suite heard me mutter an epithet under my breath about the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator. And in a reversal of roles, the cop took the doc by the arm out into the break room and said, let me tell you about the defendant, the perpetrator, whom I've known for 20 years, and proceeded to give me a Joe Gunther-esque account of this person's life. And so all of a sudden, this pure black and white incident that I was thinking about became infused with some shades of gray.
Yeah, Yeah, which, yeah, I mean, book after book after book. I'm so empathetic to that. As coincidences would have it, the book that's just come out, The Orphan's Guilt, for a moment, I couldn't remember the title. The Orphan's Guilt, number 31, does precisely that. It starts mundanely enough with a traffic stop for a DUI, and the exact kind of encounter you're suggesting, you know, and when I was a police officer, we did this all the time. You see some erratic behavior, you follow the protocols to an nth degree because your life may be at stake. You don't know who you're pulling over. And then you engage in conversation and you realize, okay, you're safe. And there's an element of gentle professionalism on both sides. This guy is almost a professional drunk because he's been caught drunk driving so many times. And certainly the cop allows himself to be that, which is, I had a mentor as a police officer in the academy who said, you must regard every civilian encounter with a police officer as a public relations opportunity. And I really took that to heart, which makes me all the more chagrined looking at current events, when you just go, what? You did what? Now I understand, you know, circumstances are, you know, I'm not going to judge anybody else, but certainly having been in a number of tense situations, I would suggest that there's always an alternative to some of the horrors we're seeing. And certainly the police officer in Orphan's Guilt is mature enough and thoughtful enough and keyed down enough to judge every situation on its merits, and recognizes this guy John Rust as you know, a straight up guy. But to your point, that's just the start. And what I love about writing these kinds of stories is that then we dig in and we find out about John Rust. And first and foremost, you know, cops are not really supposed to be motivated by motive, except where it might direct them towards something probative that would send this person to jail, or at least the prosecutor for consideration of jail. But in my world, it's all about motive. Why are you a drunk? Why were you out that night? Etc. And what we discover, of course, is the background of John Rust, which is filled with longing and pathos and sacrifice and loss and mystery in the most fundamental use of the word, which is wonderment. John Rust is an extraordinary human being, a man who, in response to certain traumatic stimuli, his response was to give. And the sacrifice was huge. He gave away his life, he gave away his sobriety in exchange for doing the decent thing, an honorable thing. But he vanishes for 90% of the book. He's gone. You don't see him. You don't hear from him. Nobody knows where he is. And in his absence, reflective of times and culture and humanity, he is immediately suspected of miscreants, of evil doing. And I love that. I you know, it's so, because when he resurfaces, of course, he reveals himself as who he is rather than what he's been imagined to be. So that's part of the story arc, is unstated. It's just what we do in the Latin.
And that's one of the things I love about the opening of this novel is, and I'm sure everyone in attendance today knows this, that I can't tell how many times in my career and yours, how big cases have started because somebody had a burned out taillight, or they were driving a little bit too fast in a school zone and they get pulled over, and then stuff happens.
Yes. Yes. I've been asked, or I used to be asked, I'm retired as a police officer, but you know, people say, well, why'd you pull me over? And I said, well, your license plate light was out. And they're looking at me like, so what? I mean, it could have just had mud on it. I mean, you know, what are you thinking? And I said, I can't just stop you. But if I have possible cause, which is different than probable cause, then I get to meet you. And I can honestly say it's been a pleasure, and fix that light and have a nice evening. Or I say, get out of our car and spread your legs because you're in trouble. But you're quite right. You never know. You never know. And the startlement of, here's a job where you put on a bulletproof vest, actually bullet resistant for the vest, every morning. Imagine doing that in your walk of life, is you put on something that's supposed to perhaps maybe protect you when someone shoots you. So that should do something to your brain. Unfortunately, oftentimes it doesn't, but it should be a wake-up call of the kind of duty you're about to enter. And so there I am, doobie-doo, and I'm in Bellows Falls, speak of the devil, and I remember this particular evening because, hey, how many cars do you pull over in an evening? Well, the answer is a lot of them, if you're not falling asleep in your cruiser. And so you pull them over and you do the protocol. The protocol is you circle around behind the back of your cruiser. You blind them with all those lights. People always say, why do people always light up all those lights? Well, we want to blind you so you can't see us in the mirror. And then you go down the passenger side of the car. And at the last possible moment, once you realize you've seen all the shadows and shapes and you've counted the heads in the car and whatnot, you turn on your flashlight. And what did my flashlight immediately hit? A handgun, right next to the guy's right hand. Now, as it turns out, in Vermont, that was entirely legal. He had no papers on him that counter-indicated that. And it was a very pleasant encounter, and I wished him a happy evening. But it could have been different, and there it is. So you bring all that to bear, and you bring all the stuff that you don't consider and don't think about and don't talk about in common parlance, and you introduce it to your novel. Because the novel, to me, is the arena, the resting place of thought, of consideration, of mulling through things. You can actually alter the universe to address questions, unanswered in normal dialogue. Most of us, we say, hey, how you doing? Oh, great, killer about those Mets, and you go your separate ways. But in a novel, you can make anything happen you want to have happen. It's an exciting world to inhabit.
Well, and exciting for me as a reader, because not only do I get to see this character development either within a single novel or over the arc of the novels, again, harping on Willie, but and his journey as a human being, but also a deep sense of place for somebody like me who unfortunately has never been able to visit Vermont to date. I get this amazing picture of a place and see, as somebody who lives in Kentucky near the Appalachian Mountains, a lot of the similarities as well as a lot of the differences between our two states.
Yeah. Place was always character to me. I was always very sensitive, and people have heard me say this more than once, how I almost challenge people meeting for the first time to catch hold of the fact that within the first 10 minutes of conversation, you're going to say where you're from. Mm-hmm. Interesting accent. Oh, well, where do you live? Oh, it comes up somehow or another. It comes up. And indeed, in our conversation, we now all know I'm in Vermont and you're from Kentucky. Right. It's just what we do, and I in my fantasies, I go, well, sure we did, because when we were dragging saber-toothed tigers on a lucky day behind us, we'd say, oh yeah, I'm from the cave up on the hill. You must be one of the valley cave dwellers, because I haven't seen you before. It's just, it's hardwired into us. And so I thought, well, for God's sake, at first, when I began this whole idea of being a novelist, I conjured up a place called Julesburg, Virginia. Don't look it up. It ain't there. And I've never lived in Virginia. I know nothing about Virginia. What the hell was I thinking? You know, and this was the learning curve before I wrote Open Season, Joe Gunther's first outing. I had to bring myself to roost to figure out a launching pad that would be reliable and ever present for this series of books, which I always did envision as a series. I didn't envision 32 books, but nevertheless, and Julesburg, Virginia wasn't going to cut it. But my own backyard, the state in which I resided, they or it and I could grow old together, which we've happily done. I mean, that's the weird part for someone who moved around as much as I. Casting my eyes over my shoulder, that's one thing I did really well, was to choose Vermont as a place to live.
A universe in not a grain of sand, but in a backyard, in a state.
Indeed, and you know, and who would figure? People say, "Oh, yeah, you know, right about Vermont, got a bunch of friggin' farmers and cows." Don't kid yourself. Yes, there may be 15 people in Vermont. Okay, I understand that. You know, one's the governor and one's the guy under your bridge, but it is a universe, and it does, you know, hold most of everything in its palms. Are we multicultural? Not particularly. Are we multiracial? Well, pretty slim. But we are nevertheless what we are, and I could find that to be rich. And I guess it takes going into something like that with reception in your head rather than rejection. And rather than looking at Vermont's too small, Vermont's too rural, Vermont's too white, instead turn that around. Can those not be advantages? Can those not be, in fact, neutral considerations? Because Vermont is filled with human beings, and by God, that's a commonality. So that's sort of what I chose to do, and the challenge was, will it last? Well, here we are, 31 books a year later, and it seems to be working.
You know, one of the reasons I think it will continue on is you are a person of innate curiosity. You've alluded to that before, wanting to know the why. And I can't remember, it was at Colby College where either you or some other lecturer, because you've given some lectures there as well, said you can't go to the corner for a cup of coffee and not come back with at least 5 stories. And I think it's that innate curiosity, whether you're a journalist, a historian, a novelist, that even after all these years keeps things fresh.
Yeah. People ask me, where do you get your ideas? Because sometimes these books, actually the present book is not excluded, can get pretty complicated. And the one I just finished, by the way, sneak preview, 32 is already completed and I'm editing it now. So that makes this look like a Hardy Boys. I mean, I have I am my father's son. Let's put it that way. The world's most complicated man, as my mother described him. Well, I'm the son of the world's most complicated man. And I never see a straight line from A to B that I can't put 15 curves into. And it's just, that helps enormously. And when someone says to me, where do you get your ideas? I just say, I open up the newspaper, the local newspaper. I don't need the New York Times. The Brattleboro Deformer, as we nickname it, is good enough for me. You know, and look who I hang out with, you know, firefighters, EMTs, death investigators, cops. These are all my friends. Boy, just like you said, you know, share a donut and a coffee with them, and you walk away with your head teeming with notions.
Oh, absolutely. Can I tell a story out of turn about the Joe Davis Bellows Falls comment incident?
Oh, wonderful. Yes.
Okay, no spoilers. For those of you that haven't read Archer's novel Bellows Falls, which is one of my favorite, full disclosure, I'm sure I have unconscious bias, because there's a police sergeant named Greg Davis in that novel. And my son, who was, I think, 13 at the time, he's 37 now, reads the book, loves it. He puts it down. His brow is furrowed because he has a flair for the dramatic. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, I love the book, except I was kind of hoping Greg Davis would get killed off." So I said, "Okay, thanks, Oedipus. Sorry about that."
Yeah. Well, so that brings up character names, and of course, like, you are not a police officer, and God knows what I did to you in the book, but it was not a reflection of your personality. Almost, I was thinking the other day that, in fact, in Open Season was the first time I used someone real's name. And I didn't realize that it went that far back, but certainly nowadays, there is not a single book that doesn't have 5 to 10 character names that don't come from the real world. And nowadays, they are all auction winners. I threw under the bus for free, but everybody else has to pay, and they pay the bent-eared, left-pawed puppy society, or the local library, or the local hospital, or something. I always try to make sure that they're righteous causes. The KKK, despite how many times they've begged me, I don't do their auctions. But the winner of the auction, and thank God I phrased my entry properly. And the description was, become a character in a forthcoming Joe Gunther book. Caveat: the author gets to do anything he wants with that name. Oh my God, some of the feedback I get. and I remember someone, this lady, actually very sweet, and she'd put in her aunt's name, elderly aunt, and Emily or something. And I said, and she was so happy and so delirious. And I went, I'm going to have to revisit this caveat. And I said, that means that if I have a slot open for a dead crack whore, and bless her heart, she went, "Oh no, she'll love it." so once in a rare move, I will actually sort of be a little gentle. We were talking about our kids earlier, and Elizabeth, my daughter, who's also 37, she asked for her entire then primary school class for their first names to be characters in the book. And so I was, very happy to accommodate, but by God, I was very careful about how I describe, pre-teenage kids. They were going to pick up this book and go, "Oh my God, he made me a hooker," So no, I wasn't about to do that. But it's the only time I've exerted some caution.
Like, the other thing I did want to touch on is not only your research in police procedurals that you're already intimately familiar with just because of your previous employment and forensic pathology and all that sort of thing, but one of the things that your books have inspired me to do is explore subjects that I never would have considered. Like, I am a financial complete ignorant person, and yet you've explored financial crime, things that I've had to a couple of times have a dictionary by my side just so I could be sure I knew what was going on. And I think that's the other really enjoyable thing, is not only are we following a narrative, not only are we getting to know people, but you're also, again, not in a didactic, preachy way, but educating the reader too. And I think that's part of that respect for both your character and for the person reading the pages.
Writing is commonly described as a solitary art, and if not an art, a craft, although I've come to understand my participation as artistry, mostly because it remains so mysterious to me, no pun intended. But it is definitely seen as isolated, and yes, I would say that when I write, certainly, because I'm not a collaborator by instinct or nature, um, I uh, I nevertheless write alone in a room with no music and no distractions and no sounds and no Jeopardy reruns on the TV set. Uh, However, I write collaboratively with my readers. I have always envisioned my clientele, if you will, as co-storytellers, because I never forgot that I started life as a reader. And as a reader, when I peel open a book, I turn my imagination on because it's my job to fill in some of the blanks. Now, to superimpose my craft with that concept, Joe Gunther enters the room. Well, what's he look like? Well, I, the author, I don't describe him, but you know what he looks like, and you know what he sounds like. I don't describe his voice either. So right there, I've pulled you in as a co-creator. And that to me is what always made me happiest as a reader, is when I felt enticed. The movie had been turned on in my head, and I was filling in all the blanks, despite the fact that they were curiously absent from the descriptive passages in the book. It's a fine line, because the author can't leave you dangling. You can't snap out of that daydream and go, what happened? Where are we? Who's this? You know, so and that's where the editing comes in. You edit, or at least I do, repeatedly, but with, in part, the mission of keeping that window, that creative window, half open so that people can come in.
So
We should probably stop monopolizing and see if there are any questions.
yeah, I was going to ask if anybody had any questions that we should consider.
Well, yeah, please type any questions you might have in the chat box. Rachel and I would be happy to pose them, or, you know, you can answer on screen. Let us know if you'd like to do that. But I had a question I thought to start us off for both of you. Greg, earlier you were talking about how Archer gets it right. What are the things that other people get wrong all the time?
Oh, well, you know, all right, I was going to try to take the high road, but I'll do a comparison and contrast. I won't name any names, but let's just say that I've been a forensic pathologist for 34.5 years, and I have never dove into inky black waters to arrest a bad guy who killed the person that I autopsied. You know, I always had a crush on the actor, is it Gillian or Gillian Anderson? She played the agent Dana Scully on the X-Files, and, you know, she did her autopsies at night by herself, got the DNA and the slides back within an hour, things that, you know, back in the 90s were taking us 6 months, you know, she was doing in a day. You know, a popular current television show, The Medical Examiner's, stars David McCallum. Remember Ilya Kuryakin from The Man from U.N.C.L.E.? He plays Ducky. Well, Ducky talks to his deceased patients. If I ever did that in the autopsy suite, I would be evaluated by our human resources department. Let's just put it that way. But I think one of the things, you know, circling back to how Archer does it right, and how many authors unfortunately don't, is we often talk about the holy trinity of death investigation, right? There's physical evidence, there's confessions, and there are witnesses. And as Archer has demonstrated in some of his books, you know, witnesses, sometimes they're not reliable. Confessions, sometimes they are forced or false. Maybe the person is wrestling with their own inner demons, or or have guilt projected on them by someone else. Physical evidence can be misinterpreted, even though physical evidence doesn't lie. So there is, Archer mentioned art versus craft, and I don't pretend to understand that at all. I think maybe it's both. But that's true in death investigation and forensics as well. You know, the science of death investigation is, we can all agree that's a blue and black pen. The art is, well, oh my goodness, how is that interpreted in the context of this particular investigation, where it was found, what's on it, etc. And Archer consistently gets that right. You know, the other thing is, I don't wear, and I've never seen a death investigator wear some of the suits that I've seen in some novels and on TV that probably cost more than my monthly salary. But, you know, but it makes for good entertainment. And what I respect about Archer is I am entertained, but I'm also not figuratively throwing the book against the wall like we talked about before. But again, and I think it shows a respect to the reader. It also shows a respect to those of us who do it for a living, because we often wrestle, Dafydd, with what we call the CSI effect when we go to court, where judges, lawyers, jurors have read some of the other stuff or watched some of the stuff on TV, and for goodness sake, they think we can do things that we just can't do. I mean, I was asked years ago in court on cross-examination, doctor, what do you think the deceased person was thinking as he lay dying? And I turned to the jury and I said, you know, I'm good, but I am not that good. But I think that a particular attorney either was just being crazy or was misled by some of the stuff they had encountered before in the genre.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a reference to we did a break and enter case that went to trial for some bizarre reason, and I was on the stand, and there was an inquiry about whether we had lifted the epithelials from the doorknob. Oh, no, I guess we missed that one. It's a doorknob. Everybody, including we, used it to enter the room, and epithelials be damned. You know, plus we don't have the budget for your flipping epithelials, not to mention that when we opened the door, the guy was there with the loot in his hand. It was just, you know, it was farcical, but typical. As Greg points out, it happens all the time. To the point where, as you just said, that, you know, we have actually labeled it the CSI effect because it comes up so frequently. It's astonishing.
Thank you both. There's a question in the chat from Margaret, and I think the first parts can be for both of you. Do you have a favorite author whose books you like to read? And then Archer, which of your books is your favorite?
Well, I can answer the last first, and then I'll give it to Greg, because I actually don't read murder mysteries. So Greg may not either, but he's more of a gentleman than I, and will say something politer than what I just did. But the second part is oh God, I forget what the second part. What was the question? I forget.
Favorite one of your own books?
Oh yeah. God, senior moment. Sorry. I do this chronically. Unfortunately, I began at the age of 12, so I can't blame old age. My favorite book is always the one I haven't written yet, because it's perfect. Completely unmarred by my poor efforts to render it onto the page. I mean, they really are. They're, for the book that's up there right now, they are trying to figure out how to give me a Nobel Prize. I mean, it's that good. And yet they don't need to lose any sleep. But okay, so Greg, tell me, who do you read murder mysteries ever?
The only mystery writer I read is Archer Mayer, and I can't pick a favorite book. Just to hijack a metaphor that's usually used by the author and not the reader, it would be like asking me to pick between my kids. I love them all very differently, but very intensely, because they're different individual human beings, right? You know, it's a naive young parent who says, "Oh, I love all my children exactly the same." No, you don't. They're different human beings. But so I could never pick my favorite Archer book, though by far and away he's my favorite mystery writer because I don't read anybody else. I've picked up and dabbled in others, and I just slam it shut and give it away to somebody else who might enjoy it.
That's my problem.
I always try to have a fiction and a nonfiction going at any time. One of my favorite writers, people like Rebecca Solnit, John McPhee, Robert McFarlane, those people. Fiction writers, even though he is radically different than me politically, I separate the artist from the art. Mark Helprin is one of my favorite novelists, but he's like over here on one side, and I'm different. But he writes like an angel. So, you know, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
But we were talking offline to Rachel and Dafydd earlier. One of the things that I lament about the lockdown is I get a lot of great ideas, but whenever I travel, I go to whatever the independent bookstore is in that town and just browse. And then ultimately I'll circle around to the desk at some point and say, "Hey, who do you recommend? You got any local folks?" You know, that kind of thing. And I really miss that personal interaction with my local bookseller. That's I mean, the three things I love to do the most in life: read books, eat my wife's cooking, and take walks in the woods. I mean, I can still do most of that during the lockdown, but I can't visit bookstores. It hurts.
So Greg, speaking of visiting bookstores, I got a question that was sent to me by Helen in the chat. She asked, when are you coming to Vermont? Because we would love to host you in Northshire. So please come on up and visit.
I would love to do that. I'm ashamed to say the only New England state I have yet to visit is Vermont, and Archer has kindly always kept his door figuratively open. And one of the first things I'm going to do with my wife, who's from New England and has visited Vermont, we're going to come up for a visit, and I would love to visit the bookstore.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, we will treat you like Kentucky royalty.
I am a Kentucky colonel, along with thousands of other people. But
yes, it's an army that starts with colonels and moves up, right?
Pretty much.
There's another question in the chat for Archer, which was, can you talk a little bit about your experience at they say AM Press, but I believe it was the University of Texas Press, and how you came to be your own publisher?
Yes, it was at the University of Texas Press, and a good catch. In fact, the AM Press, A&M Press is what they call themselves, it was created by the defecting director of the University of Texas Press. So there's a considerable warfare as well, one might imagine, in the state of Texas about this subject matter. But I was what they called a special projects editor at the UT Press back in the 1970s. And the reason that I was called that was because they didn't know what the hell else to do with me. I needed a job. And being the self-effacing, sort of meek and mild and quiet fellow that I am, I knocked on the door of the Chancellor Emeritus of the University of Texas and said, "You don't know me, but you're going to want to." And to get me out of his office, which was vast, he said, "Well, let me call the director of the University of Texas and see if he doesn't have a job for you. You know, please leave. Whereupon I went, oh yeah, absolutely. So being unemployed and living at the Motel 6, I drove across campus and walked into the office of Phil Jones, who had just been transplanted from the University of Chicago Press to head up UT Press. Well, displaying all full prejudice, this was a very short man with a hair problem. And his ego was commensurately enormous. And when I walked in the door, he said, "Were you the guy the chancellor, just called me about?" And body language has never been easier to read. And so I said, "Yeah, that old son of a bitch, I can't imagine, God, that was so arrogant. That was so full of him that, I can't, God, I begged him not to do that, what a jerk." And of course I got the job. But job at what? I knew nothing about scholarly publishing, and I sure as hell didn't have the adequate academic training to stand in as an ABD, as they used to call the editors there, all but dissertation. I barely had a BA. So I very shortly said, "Oh, well, what you need is an AV program. And of course you need fiches and you need projectors, and we'll publish this and we'll publish that and we'll put it all together." And then I spent the first 6 months of employment gently and very carefully putting him in the decision-making role as to why this was an idea that really wouldn't work. So he couldn't fire me because I hadn't given birth to an egg, but nevertheless, so that was my employment. And after that, I hit the ground rolling, going into archives, pulling out old manuscripts. This is much more my comfort zone. And indeed, we ended up on the bestseller list for 6 months, which we'd never done before because of a project that I brought in. That really gave me an advantage later on when I became a writer, because I'd been in the publishing gig, albeit at a scholarly house, for 5 years. So then when I would communicate with publishers and they would give me one line or another, I'd say, "Hang on, guys, I actually used to sit in your chair. So I know what you just said to me. Can we do this again?" And we would. Therefore, about 18 books into the Joe Gunther series, I understood that I'd been surviving on A Miracle and a Prayer because they were all still in print. And when somebody in accounting went, "Hang on, these books aren't making us a lot of money, let's discontinue them," I was first in line saying to them, before the advent of ebooks, etc., "Hey, these are useless books to you. If you just give them back to me for free, lock, stock, and barrel, I'll create my own publishing company and all boats will rise on the incoming tide." It's always good to use tired out phrases with publishers. They really love that stuff. It sounds very literary. And that's exactly what happened. I was astonished. I got all 18 books back and created AM Press. And indeed, since my overhead was non-existent and their overhead was enormous, if I made $1.98, per book, I was making a profit. Whereas with them, it was 6 times a loss. When I met Margot, of course, she came on board and we married, and she took over the whole front end of the office and really made all that global. And so now Dafydd, for example, can go on his computer and get those 18 books through a national distributor. That was far loftier than the lines I'd been thinking along. And she brought me into the 21st century. So it's been a great collaboration that way. And it's allowed me to get back to the writing instead of the 50% time I was spending being a publisher and a writer. So it's an interesting question because it actually reveals a lot of what consumed an enormous number of years on my part before things settled the way they are now.
Well, I want to thank you both. We're out of time, unfortunately, and Rachel apologizes. Her internet has given out. It's 6:02. This has been a fantastic evening. Greg, Archer, thank you both so very much. It's been wonderful to see all of you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And Archer, always wonderful to see you.
Oh, God, sir, my heart is yours. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. The Orphan's Guilt is the new book, number 31. Order it, Northshire, or your other independent bookstore.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.